Hello, I'm Gwen Eiffel. Welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. Joining me around the table, John Dickerson of Slate Magazine and CBS News, John Harwood of CNBC and the New York Times, Martha Raddatz of ABC News, and Molly Ball of The Atlantic. We have another round of consequential primary voting, one of them in Kentucky potentially affecting the livelihood of the Senate Republican leader, and the other a Republican free-for-all in Georgia. Let's start with that race in Georgia, Molly. Aren't you on your way to cover it?
I am. I am heading out to Atlanta on Sunday. There's 5 candidates of varying stripes in this race. It's another one where the lines are a little ambiguous. Everybody really trying to run to the right. Everyone's saying they're more conservative than the last. At this point, it seems like the top 3 are David Perdue, who's a first-time candidate, whose cousin was the governor, and so he's got some name recognition for that. He's a businessman, and so he's saying he's the outsider, also seen as sort of an establishmentarian country club type, and he's made a few first-time candidate gaffes. Congressman Jack Kingston, who is also a doctor, he is also seen as one of the top candidates. He's very conservative. And Karen Handel, who's a former Secretary of State, also used to be the head of the Susan G. Komen Foundation when it got into controversy for trying to stop the funding for Planned Parenthood. So a very interesting field of candidates. It's really not clear. There's not been a lot of good polling, and it's really not clear who's on top.
John Dickerson, in Kentucky, this was supposed to be a big, hot primary, but it doesn't look like so much.
No, Mitch McConnell looks like he's not really under threat anymore. Now, he may be under threat in the general election, which some people might have thought would have been kind of the reverse, trouble in the primary, but okay in Kentucky. One of the elements of the Tea Party versus the establishment story that we've talked about is there were politicians, Mitch McConnell's one of them, John Cornyn in Texas was another, that were supposed to be punished for their behavior. And the punishment isn't really happening. John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, was also supposed to get punished because he took Medicaid money as a part of the Affordable Care Act. He's actually doing quite well. The punishment doesn't seem to have come in there. So that's one of the elements here, is whether the ability to go after these Republicans in name only, as they're sometimes called, is really it really works. And that's the split there is really between the people who claim to be the head of the grassroots organizations and then the actual members of the grassroots, who may not be as interested in retribution as the leaders are.
You know, we didn't get into 2016 Republicans during the regular broadcast, but this week a couple of interesting things have been unfolding. We saw Chris Christie come out and say, Bridgegate? What Bridgegate? I'm fine. I'm still thinking about it. We saw Rand Paul suddenly start talking about why voter ID is something the Republicans should walk away from. And we saw Marco Rubio kind of tacking to the right some more by talking about climate change and how he doesn't believe it's true. Are they all positioning themselves now for the big, fateful run?
Absolutely, they are. And it's very interesting to see the moves that they're making. There's a lot of, the clock is ticking, and it's not going to be long. Probably won't even be until November, until we start to know for sure who's really going to get in. Christie saying that Bridgegate, he says it's going to be a footnote. He says it's over. He's right in a way. It is, the worst of it is behind him if another shoe doesn't drop. But there is still the potential for another shoe to drop. And the damage has been done. He is not the candidate that he was, before this all happened. And you have other candidates trying to define themselves. Paul, interestingly, for a candidate who's associated so strongly with his father's philosophy and with a certain niche in the party, has been trying to make himself sort of the electability candidate, the one who can speak to non-traditional Republican audiences, the one who can win a general election.
Yeah, it's going to be a footnote for Christie in the sense that it's an interruption at the end of every sentence. Because when he campaigns, think of Mitt Romney, his sterling credentials as a businessman, right? That was his unassailable trait. And what did they do during the Republican primary? They tried to brain him with it. And so if your greatest trait as Mitt Romney can be used as a weapon against you, imagine what this will be, how this will be used in the hands of a possible primary opponent, and all of the questions from the press. I think what Rubio is basically trying to do is remind the media, and particularly donors, that he's still around. And so if he can get some coverage and people speculating about him as a viable candidate, he can
reminding scientists he's also around, too.
That's right. Yes, there was a lot of talk about his opinions on climate change. But he can take those clips to the donors and say, look, people are talking about me and I'm viable, and pay attention to me instead of the 5 or 6 governors who are running.
Remember when I was the one that you all loved so dearly, and now I'm still here. John, I want to ask you about a story that broke today, which is interesting. It's about General Motors, which we've been watching. Kind of, they're coming back from bankruptcy, then they get a new CEO, then the CEO takes over, and there's this huge recall, millions and millions of cars, and today a big settlement.
$35 million, which was the maximum allowed under law. Legislators on Capitol Hill criticized it as a pittance. It's not going to make much of a difference, but that's and there's legislation to increase the maximum, but that's where it is right now. Look, the one thing that is clear is that the honeymoon for Mary Barra, the new CEO, was very short because this broke a couple of weeks after she took the job. And part of the investigation was to try to figure out whether she had any responsibility or knowledge of this. She said she did not. That has not been established. So I think GM's going to do what it can to move on, having paid the fine. It is accepting an extraordinary level of oversight from the federal government so that any time a safety-related issue crops up, they've got to report that immediately to the government. The government will watch them dealing with that issue. That is their in some ways, that's a good thing for GM because it lets them say to the driving public out there, we are doing everything possible to fix these problems.
It's like a $35 million Band-Aid that you're ripping off to just kind of get to the next, get beyond this moment.
Exactly.
Martha, you had an interview this week with Chuck Hagel, Secretary of Defense, in which he said something I didn't expect to hear him talk about, which is what should happen with transgendered people in the military who are not now allowed in, and he seemed to be open to the possibility of revisiting that policy.
Which surprised me, I'll tell you. It was one of those sort of throwaway questions at the end that I asked him and assumed he would just, say, give the standard line, because no one has said, let's take another look at this policy. But indeed, he said, look, everybody who is able to serve has a right to serve, and we should take another look because they are throwing out people who may come in as a woman and say, I'm not a woman, I'm a man, and they throw them out. So it was very surprising that he said what he said, and clearly followed up on that days later when others asked him about it.
Well, that was it. Was he just riffing, or is there actually active reassessment happening?
I think there probably is active reassessment happening.
And what kind of reaction was there to him saying this?
The reaction, certainly from the transgender community was very good, and I don't think he got a whole lot of backlash on it that I saw.
Not from Republican members of Congress?
I don't know, to tell
it's
you.
possible
to tell you the honest truth, I don't really know.
That's refreshing. Maybe it's possible that Don't Ask, Don't Tell has now laid the groundwork for things to change in the military without a lot of upheaval and debate. Thank you all very much. If you want to keep up with everything else our panelists are writing and reporting on, and there's so much, you can go online every day to the Washington Week website. Click over to the Essential Reads tab. And while you're there, you can read my take on the 5 things you may not have heard about my interview this week with Bill Clinton. And we'll see you again next time on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.